The first hard frost came on a Thursday that year, 3 weeks earlier than anyone had predicted, and by the time the sun was fully up, Nora Vance had already pulled every last squash from the kitchen garden, banked the root cellar against the cold, redistributed the preserved stores to account for what had not made it through the summer, recalculated the winter provisions for 14 people, and was standing at the kitchen stove with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, making the kind of breakfast that a working ranch required when the temperature had dropped overnight and the men had 40 acres of frozen fence line to walk before noon. She had been doing some version of this since 6 o'clock on a Thursday morning in October of 1869. It was now October of 1889. The town of Copper Falls had said she would not last a week. They had said it out loud, which she had always respected. There was an honesty in saying a thing directly that she found preferable to the alternative, even when the thing being said was about her. They had said it at the general store and at the church auxiliary and at the feed merchant's counter, and they had said it specifically to her face on at least 2 occasions, once by a woman whose name she had long since forgotten, and once by a man whose name she remembered perfectly, and who had been eating her bread at the Hardin Creek harvest supper every autumn for 16 years running without, as far as she could tell, any awareness of the irony. She had never mentioned it to him. The bread was good, and he ate it. That was between him and his conscience. If you know what it means to be told you will not last, and then to last, and then to last again, and then to keep going until the lasting becomes the story itself, subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far tonight's story travels, because what Nora Vance built in 20 years in the mountains of Montana is not a small thing, and the man who watched her build it has been carrying something for a long time that he has not yet found the words for. Stay with me. She had come to the Hardin Creek Valley in the autumn of 1869, which was to say she had come at the worst possible time, which was also the only time she had. She was 24 years old. She was not a small woman. She had been broad and round-shouldered since her 16th year, the kind of woman who took up space in a room in a way that announced itself, and the women of Copper Falls had looked her over on the day she arrived with the appraising, skeptical quality of people who have lived in hard country and have developed theories about who survives it and who does not, and had decided on the available evidence of her dress and her trunk and the way she descended from the stage that she was not the kind of woman the high Montana Valley required. What they had not seen, what the available evidence did not convey, was that she had grown up on a farm in eastern Kansas, where the wind came in flat across 300 miles of nothing and took whatever was not nailed down, and that she had been managing a working household since her mother's death when she was 13, and that she could read a soil report and a weather sky and a man's face with equal facility, and had been doing all three since before most of the women of Copper Falls had arrived here themselves. What she had come for was the position at the Alderman Creek Ranch, which was run by a man named Hank Alderman, who had advertised for a housekeeper and cook in the Billings newspaper, and had received, in response, a letter from Nora Cole of Salina, Kansas, that was 3 paragraphs long and contained more useful specific information about the management of a working ranch household than any letter he had received before or would receive after. He had written back the same week. The driver who took her the 9 miles from town to the ranch was a young man who had the decency not to say what everyone else in Copper Falls had apparently been saying since the advertisement ran. He said the ranch was large, and the work was hard, and the winters were serious, and she said she was aware of all 3, and he said Hank Alderman was a fair man and a quiet one, and she said that sounded agreeable, and that was the extent of their conversation. What she knew about Hank Alderman before she arrived, fair, quiet, and running a ranch of 400 head alone, since his older brother had gone back to Ohio 2 years prior. What she learned in the first week: he rose at 4:30, worked without complaint, paid what he owed on the day he owed it, and had the particular quality of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said, and had never seen the use of saying more than was required. He was 31 years old. He was tall and spare, with light grey eyes that looked at things directly and noticed more than he reported. He had, as far as she could determine, no feelings about the fact that she was a large woman who took up considerable space in his kitchen, which distinguished him from approximately everyone else she had encountered since arriving in Montana. He had not said she would not last a week. She had noticed that. She had not attached any particular importance to it beyond noticing it, because she was not in the habit of building expectations on the foundation of a man simply behaving decently, which was what decency deserved and nothing more. She lasted the week. She lasted the month. She lasted through a November that dropped to 30 below for 9 consecutive days and froze the creek to the bottom and required her to haul water from the spring on the south slope twice a day, while also managing the stores and the cooking and a ranch hand named Doss, who had developed a lung ailment that she treated with a poultice she made from what she had, which was limited but sufficient. Doss recovered. He told the story in town, which was the first story the town had about her that was not about whether she would last. She lasted through the first winter and the second and the third. She expanded the kitchen garden in the spring of her second year to include medicinal herbs she had written away to Kansas for the seeds of, and in the spring of her third year she established a proper larder system in the root cellar that meant the ranch did not run short of anything in February for the first time in its history, and in the fourth year she began keeping a record of the weather and the soil and the yields in a book she bought herself from the Copper Falls dry goods store, because she had observed that Hank kept careful financial accounts and she saw no reason the land itself should go unrecorded. He found her with the record book on a Tuesday evening in the spring of the 5th year and asked what it was. She told him. He read the last 3 pages without sitting down. Then he looked at her with the direct grey eyes. "You've been doing this for 4 years," he said. 5, she said. Started the first spring. He set the book down. He looked at the window above the basin for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know you were keeping this." "You didn't ask," she said. "I didn't think you needed to." He was quiet. Then, "Can I read from the beginning?" "It's your ranch," she said. "It's your book," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The exchange lasted perhaps 4 seconds and contained something neither of them had named yet, and both of them had been aware of for approximately 4.5 years. "Yes," she said. "You can read it." He read it over 3 evenings. He did not comment on it directly, but she observed the difference in how he spoke to her about the land after that, with a specificity that acknowledged she understood it, consulting rather than informing, the shift from directing a housekeeper to talking with someone who had been paying attention. She had been paying attention from the first day. He had simply needed the book to see it. In the 7th year, the trouble came, as trouble in the Copper Falls Valley tended to come, in the form of a water rights dispute, a cattle concern out of Great Falls that had been buying up adjacent claims and now wanted the creek rights to Alderman Creek itself, which ran through the north pasture and watered the whole upper range. They sent a man named Ballard, who was good at the kind of conversation that sounded like a reasonable discussion, while actually being a series of traps, and who arrived at the ranch on a Monday morning when Hank was out at the tree line and Nora was the one who answered the door. Ballard looked at her and recalibrated visibly. She was accustomed to that particular recalibration, the moment when a man who had expected to deal with a rancher found himself dealing with a woman and decided he had been handed an advantage. She let him in. She offered him coffee, which he accepted. She sat across the table from him and listened to the full presentation. The documents, the survey irregularities he was citing, the offer, which was generous sounding, until you understood that what was being offered was money in exchange for the water that made the money possible, which was the kind of trade that only looked reasonable to people who did not intend to stay. When he finished, she said, "The survey you're citing uses the 1866 territorial benchmark, which was superseded by the 1871 reserve for this district. The creek's riparian boundary under the corrected survey falls entirely within the original alderman grant. I have the 1871 document in the house. Would you like to see it?" Ballard looked at her for a long moment. "You have the 1871 reserve," he said. "I have everything that touches this land," she said. "I've been keeping the records for 7 years." He declined to see the document. He finished his coffee. He left with considerably less confidence than he had arrived with, and Nora stood at the window and watched his wagon go down the road and turned back to the kitchen and started the noon meal. Because it was almost noon and the men needed feeding. When Hank came in, she told him about Ballard and the water rights conversation and what she had said, and she put the reserve document on the table and explained the riparian boundary, and he listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "You handled that." "You weren't here," she said. "I know." He looked at the document. Nora, she looked at him. He had a number of things on his face in that moment. She knew his face well enough by 7 years to read it, though he was not a man who displayed himself easily. What was on it was not surprise. It was something that had been building for a long time and had found, in this ordinary moment, enough pressure to show. "I don't know how to say what I mean to say," he said. "You usually do," she said. "Not this," he said. "Not." He stopped. He looked at the table. "You should have more than I've given you." She was very still. "You've been here 7 years and you have a wage and a room," he said, "and what you have built on this land is not a wage and a room's worth of work. What you have built is." He stopped again, the careful man searching. For once, for words he had not pre-organized. "I don't know what to do with the distance between what you've given and what I've given back. I've been trying to figure it out for 3 years and I haven't." "Hank," she said. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I know it," she said. "Say it anyway." He looked at her across the table. 7 years of mornings in this kitchen, 7 years of the record book and the root cellar and the medicinal herb beds and the reserve document filed exactly where it needed to be. 7 years of a man noticing, in the particular way of a man who does not miss things but does not always know what to do with what he sees. "Stay," he said, "not as the housekeeper. Stay as," he said her name again, not as a preamble this time, as the sentence itself. She looked at him for a long, level moment. Then she said, "I've been staying." "I know it," he said. "I mean stay as mine." There was a silence. "That's better," she said. They were married in November of the 7th year, which was the first November since she arrived that she spent with the title she had earned rather than the one she had been hired into. The women of Copper Falls attended the wedding in the way communities attend the ceremonies of people they have misjudged, with a combination of genuine warmth and the silent, private accounting of people who were wrong about something and are not going to say so. She did not require them to say so. What she required, and what she had, was the work. In the 8th year, she proposed expanding the kitchen garden into a commercial operation, selling preserved goods to the Copper Falls General Store and to the Billings supply chain that came through quarterly. Hank agreed, and she ran it, and by the 10th year, the Alderman Creek Preserved Goods label was on shelves in 6 establishments across the valley. In the 11th year, she established a lending library in the spare room of the ranch house, 40 books acquired over a decade, available to anyone in the valley who asked, which began with 3 people and grew to 31. In the 13th year, she delivered 3 babies in the valley during a winter so hard the doctor could not get through from Billings, and all 3 survived. And the 3rd was named Nora by parents who wanted to mark the fact specifically. In the 14th year, their son was born. In the 16th, their daughter. They were, by evidence, the children of 2 people who had decided they were going to do the work of raising a family the way they did every other kind of work, with attention and without drama, 1 season at a time. In the 17th year, the man who had told her to her face on the day she arrived that she would not last a week came to the harvest supper and ate 3 slices of her bread and stopped her at the end of the evening by the door. He was older now, and something in him had settled, the way men settle when they have lived long enough to accumulate the evidence of their own errors. "Mrs. Alderman," he said. She waited. "I said something to you once," he said, "when you first came. I wanted you to know I've thought about it since." She looked at him. He was not a bad man. He had never been a bad man. He had been a man with the ordinary deficiency of believing that what he had seen before was all there was to see. "I know it," she said. "I was wrong," he said. "Yes," she said, "you were." She did not soften it, and she did not extend it. He nodded once, which was the acknowledgement of a man who knew he deserved neither more nor less than what she had given him, and he put on his hat and went out into the autumn night. Hank was at her elbow. He had heard the exchange. She turned and found him looking at her with the grey eyes that still, after 12 years of marriage, looked at her directly and noticed more than he reported. "You've been waiting for him to do that," he said. "No," she said. "I stopped waiting for him a long time ago. I just stayed." He looked at her for a moment. 20 years come October, he said. 19, she said. "Close enough to 20, he said, that I've been thinking about it." He took her coat from the hook by the door and held it for her, the quiet, physical gesture of a man who has been doing small things for a long time because he cannot stop. "There's something I want to show you before the cold comes in." She put her coat on. She followed him out into the October night. He led her to the north pasture fence, which made no sense at this hour until they reached the gate and she saw what he had done. A post had been set, new, solid, deep sunk against the frost, and on it, in letters he had burned into the wood himself, with the careful hand she recognized from the account books and the record of the deeds, Alderman Creek Ranch. EST, 1869, she looked at it. Below the name and the date, a second line. She had to lean into the moonlight to read it. Built by 2. She stood in the cold for a long moment, with the dark mountains on 3 sides, and the creek moving in the near dark to the north, and the lights of the house behind them. And she thought about the day she had stepped off the stage in Copper Falls, Wyoming, in October of 1869, and heard the first of the things that would be said about her, and had felt them land, and had made her private accounting, and had walked on anyway. She had walked on every day since. She thought about the record book, and the Reserve document, and the preserved goods label, and the lending library, and the 3 babies who had survived a winter that would otherwise have taken them, and the small girl named Nora, who was 12 years old now, and who rode the north pasture fence line every Saturday morning because someone had to, and she had decided it would be her. She thought about the post with the words burned into it in Hank's handwriting. Built by 2. "You did this yourself," she said. "Took me most of September," he said. He was looking at the post. "I kept trying to find the words, and I kept coming back to these." She looked at him. He was 50 now, and the grey at his temples had finished what it had started, and the lines in his face were the lines of a man who had been outside in all weathers for 35 years and had no complaints about that. He was looking at the post with the expression he wore when he had said what he meant and was waiting to find out if it had landed. She took his hand. He turned it over and held hers back in the way he had held it for 12 years, with the same attention he gave everything, which was to say all of it. All the way, nothing held in reserve. "It's enough," she said. "It's not enough," he said. "It's true. Those aren't the same thing." She looked at the post for a long time. Then she looked at the mountains, which were what they always were, large and old and entirely indifferent to the things that happened at their feet, covering everything in snow each winter and uncovering it again in spring, without consulting anyone about whether they were ready. She was ready. She had been ready for 20 years. She had lasted. She had built. She had not needed anyone to tell her she was done waiting. She had simply done the work, one Thursday morning at a time, from the first frost to the last, in a valley that had decided on arrival that she would not, and had been living with the evidence of its error ever since. The creek ran in the dark north of them, entirely theirs. She was the legacy. She had always been the legacy. She simply had not stopped long enough, in 20 years of Thursdays, to look back and see it.